Hey guys, welcome back to Candid Cinema. I'm Amanda, otherwise known as AMX NDA Reviews on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Today I will be reviewing the Fear Street Trilogy on Netflix. I loved it so much. I didn't expect to love it as much as I did. Director Lee Janiak did a fantastic job with this trilogy. They're saying it's for kids, it's for young adults, and R.L. Stine wrote those books with that intention. It's for that audience. So obviously it's going to feel a bit, childish at times, but it's just a lot of fun. The reason why I'm wearing my Stab hoodie is because the first one, Fear Street Part 1, 1994, pays homage to Scream, and Scream is one of my favorites, if not my favorite horror movie of all time, my favorite slasher film of all time. I watch it on October 1st every single Halloween to kickstart my marathon. So Fear Street Part 1, 1994 does follow the exact same structure as Scream. We do see that there's one girl at the beginning of the film, kind of like Drew Barrymore in the beginning of Scream, who has the first encounter with the killer. So it was really nice just to sit there and have that first-timer feeling again. And what I mean by first-timer feeling again is that I wasn't a fan of horror films growing up, and I wasn't allowed to watch those films in particular, but Scream was my first slasher. It was my first horror film, and it's not as scary as the other horror films. So that's why I'm saying that it's a first-timer, dip your toes into the actual genre. And it's kind of like the safest horror film that won't really give you nightmares. So Fear Street 1994 feels the exact same way. And I just love that this film can be the start for so many young people in the horror genre. I'm just really excited for them to explore this and have this first time experience with slasher films, because they're so much fun. So we get that first encounter. Maya Hawke is the exact same. It's the equivalent of Drew Barrymore. She's the first kill. We never see her again. But this sparks the rumors of is there another killer in Shadyside? Is someone coming back? So the name of Sarah Fear comes up. So now the reason why this does work is that it is a slasher film, but it incorporates possession and supernatural elements. So it is deeply rooted in two other storylines, and that's why I love the connectivity between part 2 and part 3. They do find this supernatural textbook, and they find out who Sarah Fear is, how deep the lore runs in the Shadyside town. And we have these 4 teenagers. What's so great is that it is a diverse cast. We have a queer romance as the lead, and we have very different storylines that aren't as stereotypical as previous slasher films, which I really love. And I found it very refreshing, and I think that's why everyone's gravitating towards Fear Street Part 1, 1994. It's a slasher film. Of course, it's going to have the similar tropes. We get that. But the difference in this one is that they're really trying to test these supernatural elements, because the lead character of Dina, who gave a solid performance, her girlfriend, Samantha Frazier, ends up getting possessed by Sarah Fear. I enjoyed the setup of this. I enjoyed the introduction to it, but it did run a little long in the middle of the film, just because they were trying to figure out what to do with Samantha, what to do about Sarah Fear. They find another character named C. Berman that was attached to the actual book that they had. So that would eventually lead into Fear Street Part 2, 1978. So in that middle, they reconnect. There's some romance that goes on, and they're kind of locked in the school with this plan to kill the supernatural villains. So it is quite funny because they all end up going to the school and they're kind of locked in. But in those moments, it did drag on, as I said, just because the ending of Fear Street Part 1 felt like there were 3 endings, and they're really trying to prolong the kills. But once you have such a great kill, like the bread slicer, you can't really do anything better than that in that film, in my opinion. So the practical effects were cool. All of the effects were cool. The makeup was really well done. The kills were so great. I was kind of like taken aback at times, like, oh my God, that's so cool. Not that they were anything amazing, but it's all about the timing. It's about the score, as per usual. That's what makes horror films, so much fun. The score, the pop-ups, all of that, the editing. So Fear Street Part 1 definitely had that. I just think that it did get a little bit slow because they were trying to stretch the kills. And then the ending gave us a little taste of where they were going to go on the phone. So we had Dina calling C. Berman, and she didn't know what to do with Samantha Fraser, and that's where everything leaves off. I enjoyed Fear Street Part 1 1994. I gave 94 a 3 out of 5, I believe, on my Letterboxd. So then we go into Fear Street Part 2, 1978, which is my favorite of the entire trilogy. I thought it was extremely well done. This one pays homage to Friday the 13th. We get a camp, we get Camp Nightwing, we get campers, we get counselors doing shenanigans, and we just love stupid counselors. We love what happens to the campers in and out of these cabins in the forest where they're really not supposed to go. So again, the same tropes, the same conventions that we're used to, but there's this supernatural element, and the twist in this second part I did not see coming. I thought it was really well written. So we have C. Berman at the beginning of Part 2, who was played by Gillian Jacobs. Love her. And she ends up helping Dina and her brother, Josh. So Dina and Josh end up driving to C. Berman's house, and they leave Samantha Fraser chained up along one of the pipes in the bathroom. And C. Berman retells her story of staying at Camp Nightwing with her sister. So we go back to 1978. The soundtrack is pure fire, really sets the tone, sets the atmosphere. But what I loved about 1978 is that it felt like a campfire story. Like, guys, come sit around the fire. I'm going to tell you a typical ghost story. And that is exactly what it felt like. And I loved it for that reason. It sets the tone. So not only do we get a story within a story, once we get to the third one, we get a story within a story within a story. And like having all of that come together and connect to one person, which is Samantha Fraser, who is currently possessed, I thought was awesome. So again, kudos to the writing, kudos to the direction as well, because there were small things that I didn't really pick up on because I was just so invested in the characters and the storyline that I did not pay attention to the small things. So Part 2, you had Sadie Sink, who killed it. She led the film, and we see that she's an outcast at camp. People call her a witch because she's always getting into shenanigans, and whenever something goes wrong, she's always there, so they think that she's this evil person. It was really great to see her dynamic with her sister Cindy, and we get to see the counselors in the stereotypical positions. They have the virgin, they have the more promiscuous one, they have the stud, they have the dumb jock, like they have the stereotypes all present. And then there's this one nurse who is a bit out there, and it is because of the loss of her daughter. So this nurse and Ziggy are very close because obviously, like I said, Ziggy gets into shenanigans and she ends up hurting herself multiple times and all of that. She gets bullied, yada, 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 all that. But at this camp, at Camp Nightwing, Sarah Fears is buried in that area. That's why they always think that something bad is happening in Shadyside. Ziggy wants to know if this curse is real. So this is where things get very crazy. This second half, there is so much to unpack. The curse becomes real for Ziggy, and there is like an entire different world that is presented in 78 that is so important moving forward in Part 3. So after discovering all of this, Ziggy ends up figuring everything out. She has a bit of a romance, and stuff and things happen to Ziggy, and there's a massive reveal at the end of 78. I'm not going to spoil because I don't do spoilers, because I really think that this this twist, this reveal is super important heading into 66, and it was just a very, very interesting way to tell a story, to structure that story. I really enjoyed the kills. I thought it was just bloodier. It's a typical sequel. It improves upon what happens in the first one, and I really enjoyed it more. I gave it a 4 out of 5 on my letterbox, just because I liked the characters a bit more, and it was just fun. It was really fun to see these dumb counselors, and that's why I think I love Friday the 13th so much, is because they're stupid. These campers are dumb. They really are. And the villain in this one, the guy had a bag over his head and he had an axe. And the one thing that I loved about him carrying the axe is that they also paid homage to The Shining. So, you know, the scene in The Shining where he's like hammering away at the door and then the camera kind of moves with him and pulls back. I love that they did that in 78. There's some really strong choices made with the villain and the kills. And I love that they utilize the sound design. If you hear screams, but you don't necessarily see the bloodbath, I really appreciated that they did that in certain scenes. So 78 was cool. So at the end of 78, we go back to 94 and Dina ends up finding the actual remains of Sarah Fear, which is absolutely insane. This links to what happens in 78. There's an entire different world, as I said, that is linked, and they find different pieces that would help them in 66. So C. Berman ends up telling Dina all this. Dina goes to find the remains. So then as Dina's going through the remains, she ends up touching Sarah Fear, therefore having direct contact with her and transporting her to a different era. So 1966, we all know that is a very different era. It's a different world. Not many things were accepted, including a lesbian romance, which is what Dina and Samantha Fraser have. And they love each other. You can see the genuine love there, but they have to keep everything a secret. So in 1666, it's all about witchcraft. If you are a fan of that level of supernatural and the witchcraft and the Salem witch trials and all of that, then you'll enjoy 66 more than I did, to be perfectly honest. It was very interesting and it was eerie. I love what they did with all of the animals. Animals and bugs doing weird shiznit is something that back in the day, back in the 1600s, was a sign of like the devil. It would alarm everyone in the town. So really paying attention to what the animals were doing and paying attention to if the food was getting moldy and all of that. Like I really love that. And there were subtle moments where everything in Shadyside was getting worse and worse and worse, but we didn't know who invited the devil in 1666. And we do get a couple of dropped Irish accents. I have to admit they weren't that strong. But again, it was interesting. You're interested to see what finally happens to Sarah Fear because you've already invested that much time in part 1 and part 2. You're also connected to Dina and Samantha Fraser because they are possessed now, especially Samantha Fraser. So you have that connectivity between 3 eras, which is amazing. But what they did extremely well is that they kept the exact same actors from part 1 and part 2. I really just enjoyed the layers of all of this as you're going back into different eras and different times. So I thought it was really interesting that they kept the exact same actors because it comes in handy once you come back to 94. So we see all of that. We see the witchcraft. We see the love between Dina and Samantha. We see all of that, how the townspeople react. So we find out who the big baddie is. We have an incredible reveal, a different side of Sarah Fear, and I just love how everything was unwrapped. The story is extremely well written. It's fun and has multiple ways to perceive the situation, especially when it comes to doing good or doing evil and how certain people handle that in power. So I think it's really interesting what they're trying to say in 1666. And then we bring it back to 94, the present day for them, and everything kind of gets resolved. I love the final standoff in the mall. It was a genius idea. I really enjoyed it. Had a lot of fun with that. The editing was really strong when it came to like 66 and then 1994 part 2, because you saw Sarah Fear, you saw what happens in 94, and they combine it. And then what they do is that while that's going on, they're taking you back into like a Saw montage to add everything together for the audience if you missed it, but you sat there and you're like, oh my God, like this worked really well. So it's one thing if you're reading the books and you're taking it in a different way, but visually they have paid homage to many horror franchises in the smallest ways, and it paid off, because I just named Friday the 13th, I named Scream, I named The Shining, and I named Saw. So I'm pretty sure there's many other little nods to different horror franchises, but those are the ones that I picked up on. So guys, please watch the Fear Street Trilogy. If you are not a horror fan, this is a perfect starter plate for you. Please watch it. It's a lot of fun. It'll bring you back to high school. It's filled with nostalgia for the 90s, the 70s, maybe not so much the freaking 1600s, but if you like that era, you'll enjoy what they did with it. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this review of the Fear Street Trilogy, please like and subscribe. You can always find me over at AMXNDA Reviews on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Please watch Fear Street. Add it to your horror marathon list for October. I'll catch you guys next time. Keep watching movies.